Hello, welcome back to I Say You're Wrong, and today we're going to be recommending a couple of books that is perfect for reading during bonfire night. So, for all of you who aren't in the UK, a bonfire night is essentially someone tried to blow up Parliament and the monarchy about 400 years ago, 420 years ago, give or take, and they failed. Every year we celebrate that, and generally it's called Guy Fawkes Day or Bonfire Night. For the longest time, I was convinced that they celebrated it because he tried, not that he failed. So I was in the wrong side of this for the longest time. Essentially, what they do is just fireworks, bonfire night, and that sort of thing. It's a good time to sit outside in the cold and watch fancy firework displays and whatnot. It's great fun. Anyway, so I have a bunch of books that I would associate with the themes of bonfire night. None of them have actually to do with Guy Fawkes or anything like that. It's just types of books that I thought melded in with the theme. We have 3 dystopians, 2 non-fiction, 1 fantasy, and 1 comic. And I hope you enjoy. So, first up, we have our dystopians. And basically, we're going to start off strong with the original dystopian novel. This is Zamyatin's We. I didn't actually enjoy this too much when I read it, but it's the very first dystopian kind of corrupt government, that sort of thing. Looking at it, it was kind of a satirical and critical look in the Soviet regime during the early period of the Soviet regime, so before World War II. And it essentially takes place in a future where the people are made to do what the state tells it to, and under the benefactor. And when you have dreams, then it means that you're ill. And essentially, this man starts to have dreams and that sort of thing. It's very similar, I feel, in a vein to 1984, but I also don't really like that one too much either. So I think it's just I don't really vibe too well with dystopian novels. But this one I would recommend reading because it's interesting to see where the inspiration came from for a lot of dystopian novels today that focuses on corrupt governments, including 1984 by George Orwell, obviously. And so that's why I would recommend giving this a read, and why I link it to Bonfire Night, because corrupt government, that's what Bonfire Night is about. So the next one that I'm going to talk about is actually a George Orwell novel, but it's not 1984. I read 1984 and I didn't like it too much, and so I was skeptical of reading the other ones by him. But then I picked up, because my friends were reading it, Animal Farm, and I adored it. It's a really, really short novella. I read it within a day, a couple of hours, and it's really, really good kind of look on how corrupt governments kind of come about through the lens of farmyard animals. And that's why I would recommend giving this one a read, because it's short and it's very hard hitting at the same time. And you've probably heard about it before, so there's nothing really much else to say about it that recommends it, but that's why I would recommend it for this kind of theme, because it is about how corrupt governments come about and how you overthrow things, that sort of thing. And it's really interesting to read about. And last but not least is another one that I read not too long ago, and again, wasn't really a fan of, but I thought it was quite interesting, and you can get it for cheap in places, because it's like secondhand bookshops, you can get them, so it's a really good cheap read if you're wanting to read it. And it's Fawkes by Christina Dalcher, and this is about essentially set in America, where the government has outlawed women's speaking except to 100 words a day, I think. And this is an interesting rise about, I think it talks more about the kind of how quickly extremist views can rise, and how normal people wouldn't react dreadfully to it. Most would, but like some just let it happen. And it's the dangers of kind of letting something happen without really taking action against it. I think for this one, definitely, it kind of loses that kind of plot thread about halfway through, and it kind of becomes about something else. But it's definitely definitely the first half is good way of introspecting on that and how extremism can rise really, really quickly without you looking at it towards corrupt governments. Yeah, so that's also fitting the theme. And now we have our non-fiction books. So these two aren't about Guy Fawkes or the past or the kind of history of corruption in government, but rather two institutions of the UK, particularly English institutions, because this is both focusing on the English NHS and the English law system. I don't know, Scotland has a completely different legal system, and we have a separate NHS, which is suffering with the same problems that the English NHS is suffering from. But this book is mainly about the London area of the English NHS and how this is going to hurt by Adam Kay. It's the memoir of a junior doctor from 2005, kind of onwards the next couple of years, about how hard working in the NHS is, how much hours you're expected to put in, how much you're expected to go above and beyond, that sort of thing, for the NHS. And it's done in such a way that it's really funny, but it's also kind of really horrifying at the same time. It shows you like the day-to-day business, like patients, the kind of strangest things you've ever seen, but it also shows you the kind of crippling pressure that these people are under to try and get it in, and how the government is just ignoring that, or like defunding, or not even giving any help or assistance. And especially interesting to read it. I read it before the pandemic actually started, and then to see the government's attitude towards the NHS and funding and that sort of things through the pandemic has been very interesting, to compare it to the actions that the same government took through the junior doctors phase, and also the Labour government as well. So it's very interesting to like compare and contrast, especially if you kind of know what's going on with the NHS system and the politics behind it. It is a very good one to even just read, just to find out what's kind of going on and that kind of thing from the point of view of a doctor rather than the patient, which is what you normally get. And I think the NHS is a brilliant institution and should definitely be looked after and funded more than it is. And that is why I will always support the NHS. Next up is a book that I actually haven't managed to read yet, but it is been highly recommended to me quite a few times, and that is The Secret Barrister, The Stories of the Law and How It's Broken. So it's essentially about the criminal justice system in the UK, the juror, the victim, witness, the defendant, the judge, the lawyers, or solicitors, barristers. So basically it's talking about how in the legal system fairness isn't really guaranteed. It fails to protect people that it's designed to protect. Sometimes the guilty are allowed to walk free and the innocent are being locked up, and it shows the flaws in the system, and why people should care and why we should reform the system, and why the government should do that, and it should be part of like a modern society to reform our legal system and make sure that the victims and the innocent are protected in situations throughout it. So I'm really looking forward to reading this, and I do think it kind of ties into the whole real life situations that's important to read up on and kind of get yourself more informed about kind of what's going on in the country and that sort of thing, which is why I'll be reading this one pretty soon, I think, maybe next month. And that is The Secret Barrister, and it doesn't have an author because it's anonymously published. Okie dokie. So next up we've got our fantasy section, and I will always gush about this book. It's my favourite series probably of all time, and that is The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, and this is part of his Dark Materials series. So it's essentially, if you don't acknowledge any of my recommendations before, this is essentially about a young girl who ends up accidentally toppling the religious government, the system that was because they're very bad because they're trying to kidnap children and hurt them, essentially. So it's all about, they've got demons which are part of their soul outside of them, and they change until they become adults, and then they settle into one form. And the religious government, who's obsessed with the story of Adam and Eve and the creation and general religion, it's a critique in Christianity, and it's a very interesting take on it, especially when you read other essays by Philip Pullman, like in the book Demon Voices. He wrote a couple of essays on the religious aspects of his Dark Materials and how interesting it is. Although it's like critiquing governments and Christianity and all those sort of things, it's also a really good, fun children's story that definitely doesn't traumatize children at a young age. There's also another 2 books after this. There is The Subtle Knife, which is the second one, and the Amber Spyglass, which is my personal favourite. There's also another trilogy afterwards, which the first 2 books are out. The Book of Dust. They're good. I enjoy them, but I'm definitely waiting patiently for the last one to come out of that series. So this trilogy I would highly recommend. Okay, last but not least is the comic book, and anyone who's basically got anything to do with Guy Fawkes or anything will probably recognise this, and that is V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. So this is, I would also highly recommend the film. I think the film's brilliant. It's really daunting. So basically it's kind of set in an imagined future of England, where it's kind of fascism is taking over, and it's got an authoritarian police state, and there's essentially people trying to rise up against the government. I'm not going to spoil it too much because it is very interesting, and I would recommend both the film or the comic, depending on what you like. They're both very, very good, and they're well worth watching or reading it. The comic is definitely darker than the film, and that's saying a lot because the film is dark. It's very good, and it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, showing kind of how LGBT people suffer, how people of colour suffer, how women suffer underneath fascism and the totalitarian government, but also how help prop up the fascism in society and how it can rise really quickly. And it's also set after a pandemic. So cheery. Yep, just what you need in this day and age. I would highly recommend the film as well. It has got a bunch of people in it: Natalie Portman, Stephen Fry, the guy from Lord of the Rings that I can't actually remember who also played Red Skull. Very well-rounded and very good. So that was 7 books that I would recommend for reading kind of during or after Bonfire Night. It's got the same themes, got the same vibes. If you've got any books that you would recommend for Bonfire Night, leave them down in the comments and I'll try and read them for next year. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.